she invited him to join her at a table in that bustling café. Little did she know he was a millionaire, a single father, a man marked by silence and solitude. In a hidden corner of San Francisco, California, where mornings arrive wrapped in fog and cafes whisper untold stories, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. And no one knew. Not even Clara Mendez, with her hair still damp from the rain and a heart weary from too many broken promises. That morning, she stepped into the small corner cafe just to escape the cold. But unknowingly, she was about to find something that would transform not only her destiny, but her understanding of home, art, and love. Clara was the kind of person who often went unnoticed in a crowd. Her clothes were always stained with dried paint, and her gaze carried more dreams than certainties. At 33, she lived surrounded by unfinished canvases and overdue bills, holding the world with the tips of her fingers, and the little hope she still had left in her chest. It wasn't a different kind of morning. On the contrary, it was one of those days when the city seemed to want to swallow the lonely whole. Gray skies, hurried footsteps on the sidewalk, eyes cast downward, from people long used to the absence of miracles. She chose a table in the corner, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and opened her sketchbook, trying to draw something, anything, to ease the weight of what she couldn't control. She had just lost a client, missed her rent deadline, and heard once again that talent doesn't pay the bills. As her pencil traced uncertain circles on the page, a sharp sound broke through the muffled quiet of the place. A little girl was crying loudly, not seeking attention, but pleading for help. All eyes turned toward her, annoyed, except Clara's. She stood up gently, observing the girl. Big eyes, red cheeks, and an expression that blended fear and confusion. The man beside her, likely her father, tried to calm her without success. He had a serious face, but not a hard one. Well-groomed hair, crisp clothes. He stood out in that place. They looked like they came from different worlds. Clara didn't ask anything. She simply reached into her backpack, pulled out a small box of colored pencils, and placed it on the table in front of the child. The girl hesitated. Then, as if by magic, the crying stopped. She picked up a red pencil and began drawing on a napkin. The silence returned. But now it was different. A silence of relief, of presence, of something no one could name, but everyone could feel. The man looked up at Clara. There was surprise in his eyes, but also something deeper. A quiet kind of gratitude, as if that simple gesture had touched a forgotten part of him. He slowly walked over, with his daughter now absorbed in her scribbles, and asked if he could sit. Clara smiled and nodded. In that moment, no names were exchanged, no stories, just glances, just a shared table, 2 cups of coffee, and a napkin covered in small hands drawings. But if someone there had the gift of seeing the future, they would have said, this was it. Right here. This was where everything began. What Clara didn't know, and perhaps not even Ethan yet, was that this encounter was the missing piece in both of their puzzles. And little Leah, with her curious eyes and deep sensitivity to the world, would be the invisible thread that tied 2 broken souls together. Between raindrops on the window and steam rising from coffee mugs, a quiet story was beginning to unfold. A story about art, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't need words. Just a gesture, just a look. In the days that followed, Ethan Sullivan couldn't get Clara out of his mind. There was something about her, something in the way she looked at the world, as if seeing it through a transparent canvas, as if she were always painting with her eyes. He wasn't a man easily impressed. At 42, he had learned to build walls high enough to keep even the past from reaching him. But that woman, with paint-stained fingers and a calm way of moving through chaos, had touched something inside him. Effortlessly, unintentionally. His 6-year-old daughter, Leah, had felt it too. Ever since that day at the cafe, she wouldn't stop drawing. Colorful scribbles with feminine figures beside trees, butterflies, and smiling faces. She understands me, Leah would say, as if Clara had spoken to her in a language only they could comprehend. Ethan observed in silence, watching every line Leah drew, trying to understand what was happening between his daughter and the sad-eyed artist. That morning, he left the office early. He sent a message to postpone a meeting and got in his car. He didn't know exactly what was driving him, only that he needed to see her again. He returned to the same café, looked around, and for a moment thought maybe he had imagined it all. A scene conjured by loneliness. But then he saw her, across the street, entering an old building with a backpack on her shoulder and a canvas under her arm. He followed her with his eyes, then with his steps. Clara climbed the worn-out stairs as if she knew every creak in the floorboards. She stopped at an unmarked door, pulled a key from her coat pocket, and stepped inside. Ethan waited. Waited like someone hoping for an answer from the universe. After a few minutes, he crossed the street and stood in front of the building. He had no plan. Minutes later, he walked inside. The hallway was dimly lit, and the smell of paint seeped from under a door. Soft music drifted through, an old instrumental tune, almost nostalgic. He approached quietly, but didn't knock, just leaned his ear gently against the door. Inside, Clara was singing softly as she painted. A song in Portuguese, sweet, melancholic. He didn't understand the words, but he felt them. He walked away with the same silent steps he came in. That hidden visit was enough for him, a reminder that there was still beauty in the world. A beauty that didn't shout, that didn't ask for permission. But when it touched you, it left a mark no time could erase. In the days that followed, Ethan began observing from afar, quietly. A man used to solving everything with contracts and logic, now guided by something more instinctive, more fragile. He learned Clara sold some of her paintings at local street fairs, and that she often came back empty-handed, her eyes downcast. That she took buses with easels balanced on her lap, and sometimes traded drawings for coffee in small shops that welcomed her however they could. And the more he discovered about her, the more an old feeling, long buried under years of grief and responsibility, began to stir. A quiet urge to care, not to save, but to recognize a wound that looked like his own. Leah noticed. She felt it. One day, while Ethan was helping her with homework, she whispered, "You smile more when you think about her." Ethan didn't reply. He just ran his fingers through his daughter's hair, a knot tightening in his chest that he didn't know how to untie. In the solitude of his elegant apartment, surrounded by valuable art and windows far too large, Ethan began to realize he might be tired of admiring life from a distance. That maybe, just maybe, he was ready to feel again, even if he didn't yet know what to call it. That afternoon dragged on like so many others, gray and cold, when Clara found the envelope. It had been slipped crookedly under the studio door, as if someone had hesitated before leaving it there. When she picked it up, her heart raced for no apparent reason. It was a beige envelope with no return address, only her name written by hand in elegant, firm handwriting. For a moment, she thought it might be another bill, another bitter notice pushing her closer to the edge. But there was something different, something that smelled like a second chance. She opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation, an art exhibition, a gallery downtown, a known and respected name. The event was set for 3 weeks later. The paper trembled in her hands. It was signed by a name she recognized instantly, Ethan Sullivan. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. It couldn't be. He had never said anything, never made any gesture to reveal who he was. And yet there it was. The man from the café, Leah's father, was behind this invitation. A name she'd seen in interviews, in art magazines, always discreet, always elegant. The kind of person who seemed to live in another world. Clara sat on the floor, the envelope still in her hands. Part of her wanted to tear it up and send it back. Her pride roared, screaming that she didn't need charity, that she didn't want a favor dressed as an opportunity. But another part, more tired, more honest, simply cried. Cried from relief, from confusion, from fear. That week, she didn't leave the studio. She painted with an urgency she had never felt before. Not to please, not to prove anything. She painted because suddenly, a window had opened in front of her. And even if she wasn't sure she could step through it, she wanted at least to let her soul rest on the edge, feeling the wind. At the end of the week, she went to the gallery. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The space was wide and quiet, with white walls that seemed to respect the silence of each artwork. A friendly assistant recognized her immediately. "Oh, you're Clara Mendes. Mr. Sullivan spoke about you. He said room 2 is already reserved." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, a lump tightening in her throat. She returned home stunned. Ethan hadn't contacted her directly. No messages, no visits. It was as if everything had been arranged for her to remain in control, for the choice to be hers, and that only confused her more. On a shyly sunny afternoon, she saw his car park outside her apartment. She froze for a moment. Ethan stepped out, carrying a package wrapped in craft paper. He rang the bell with the same calm that lived in his eyes. Clara hesitated before opening the door. When she did, they stood in silence for a few moments. He handed her the package without saying a word. Inside, there was an empty frame and a note. For you to fill. In your time. In your way. She didn't know what to say. She just lowered her gaze, feeling something crack inside. It wasn't pain. It was pride unraveling. Ethan looked at her with kindness, without rushing, like someone who understands that some wounds require respect before they can be healed. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. He simply replied, "Because I believe in what you create, and because sometimes someone needs to hold your hand when you're forgetting how to walk." And then, for the first time, Clara didn't feel small beside him, just human, and maybe for that reason alone, closer than ever to herself. The following week, just as the city began to breathe with more color and less fog, Clara felt the ground collapse beneath her. The notice came like an unexpected blow. She had 30 days to vacate the apartment. The building had been sold. No negotiation, no extensions, just a cold decision, printed in harsh letters. She stood frozen for long minutes, staring at that piece of paper as if it could somehow change its mind. But it didn't. Returning to Brazil wasn't an option. Staying in San Francisco without a space to paint, even less. It felt like the universe was mocking her, testing how much faith her tired soul still had left. No matter how hard she tried, how much heart she poured into every brushstroke, it never seemed to be enough. Once again, life was pushing her into a dark alley. That same night, she tried to exhibit some of her pieces at a small, alternative neighborhood gallery, the kind that accepts independent artists on themed nights. She carried 2 canvases under her arm, dressed in her best clothes, her hair hastily tied, and anxiety poorly disguised. When she arrived, she realized her name wasn't on the list. She tried to explain, to argue, to show the emails exchanged with the curator. But no one seemed willing to listen. Standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by impatient stares, she was interrupted by one of the organizers, who said, far too loudly, "There's no room for amateurs tonight." The words cut like knives. The looks turned toward her, some pitying, others full of disdain. Clara felt her face burn. She swallowed her tears, turned away without saying a word and walked out, canvas still in her hands, steps hurried as if running from herself. When she got home, she locked the door and collapsed to the floor. Her hands were shaking. Her body felt worn out from fighting. For hours, she stayed there, motionless, letting the silence fill every corner. She thought about giving up, leaving it all behind, selling the paints, donating the canvases and disappearing. Maybe it had been a mistake to try living off art. Maybe all those people who said she needed a real job had been right all along. The next day, she didn't paint. She didn't draw. She just sat in front of the blank canvas, staring into the void as if it had something to say to her. It didn't. The only thing that stirred was the memory of humiliation, of pain. And yet, deep down, a stubborn part of her refused to erase everything. At sunset, as golden light spilled through the windows, Clara heard a soft sound at the door, an envelope sliding discreetly into her apartment. She walked toward it with a tight chest. Upon opening it, she found a finely printed invitation. Her name was there, in delicate letters, listed as the main artist for an exhibition happening in 2 weeks, at one of the city's most respected galleries. Along with the invitation was a short handwritten note. When everything seems to fall apart, that's when art screams the loudest. Don't give up. She recognized the handwriting. It was Ethan's. She stood there, holding the paper like it was the last thread of hope. Something inside her, maybe the 13-year-old girl who once dreamed of painting murals in public squares, stirred again. For the first time in days, Clara took a deep breath and felt that despite the fall, there was still ground beneath her. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning she never knew how to ask for. But before taking any steps, before accepting any invitation, she knew. She had to find the courage she had left behind on the gallery floor the night before. And that journey had to start from within. In the days leading up to the exhibition, Clara wavered between quiet excitement and suffocating fear. Even though she had accepted the invitation and started preparing her work, part of her still questioned whether she was worthy of that opportunity. Doubt, always present like a shadow, now seemed to scream louder with every brushstroke, every frame, every detail she reviewed in silence inside her apartment. She hadn't forgotten the humiliation from the other gallery. That wound still ached, still throbbed, but there was something new now, something stronger than fear, a fragile thread of hope, held together by the gesture of someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Ethan hadn't appeared since delivering the invitation. Clara respected the space, but felt his absence like a constant presence. It was as if he were there, in the corners of her apartment, in every loaded silence, in every ray of morning light. She kept wondering why. Why had he chosen to help her? Why among so many artists, so many stories, had he chosen her? The answer came unexpectedly. On a warm afternoon, Clara received a call from the gallery itself. Mr. Sullivan would like to schedule a visit to your studio to see the selected pieces. Her heart raced. For a moment, she thought of saying no, making up an excuse. But something inside her, perhaps pride, perhaps courage, said yes. The next morning, Ethan arrived with the same quiet presence he always carried. He wore a navy blue sweater and held a small notebook. Clara welcomed him with a restrained smile, her stomach in knots. He walked around the studio without saying a word for several minutes, observing each piece with intent, as if reading something hidden between the colors. When he stopped in front of a canvas with vibrant tones, a portrait of a woman with closed eyes and hands covering her face, he murmured softly, "This one. It sounds like silence." She didn't know what to say. That painting had been born during a sleepless, desperate night. To her, it was the very translation of everything she couldn't put into words. And now, in front of him, it finally seemed to make sense. After a few moments, Ethan turned to her and spoke with quiet conviction. "Clara, I'm not just a collector. I invest in stories, in voices the world hasn't learned to hear yet." He paused. "I want to sponsor your work, not just this exhibit. I want you to have freedom, a space of your own, a time where your art doesn't have to compete with survival." She froze. The words echoed like a distant thunder. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of, but also everything she'd feared. Accepting meant letting go of the shield her pride gave her. It meant admitting she needed help. And even more, it meant trusting. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do this for me?" "This..." Ethan took a breath. His eyes met hers, filled with honesty. "Because once, someone believed in me too. And because in every one of your paintings, I see pieces of something the world needs to remember. that beauty still survives. Clara felt her eyes well up, but it wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, a mix of gratitude, shame, and relief. She breathed in, and for the first time said, "I accept." In the following days, Ethan's presence became more frequent. He visited the studio with Leah, who would sit on the floor and draw while the two of them talked. The little girl seemed completely at home among paints, canvases, and colorful dreams. And somehow, that made everything lighter, more possible. The connection between Clara and Ethan grew quietly, like something that had always existed, even before either of them noticed. They didn't talk about feelings. They didn't need to. Their shared silences, their understanding glances, the mutual respect for wounds still healing, that was enough. And so, among brushstrokes and soft smiles, the walls between them began to crumble. Not all at once, but gently, with the care of those who know that new beginnings require time. News of the exhibit spread quickly. Social media began to mention Clara's name, some posts celebrating her sudden rise, others laced with suspicion. At first she tried not to care, told herself it came with the territory, that visibility always brought judgment. But the comments started to grow, and to sting. Just another artist boosted by a bored millionaire. Is it sponsorship or favoritism? Easy to get a spot when you have the right connections. Clara read and reread each phrase like tiny needles under her skin. It felt as if all her effort had been erased by one single gesture, accepting help. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights painting in the cold, the days she drew on napkins just to earn a coffee. None of it seemed to matter anymore. Now she was just Ethan Sullivan's protégé. As if she had no talent, only luck. As if she were a fraud. Little by little, her excitement gave way to anguish. She stopped painting for a few days, avoided looking at her canvases, as if even they were silently judging her. When Ethan stopped by and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by closed paint jars and vacant eyes, he knew something had shifted. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, just handed him her phone, screen open to the comments under her latest post. Ethan read in silence for a few moments, then sighed and sat beside her. He didn't say anything right away. He just stayed, sharing the silence like someone holding the hand of someone about to sink. They don't know who you are, Clara. They only know who you appear to be. She shook her head, tired. But what if they're right? What if I'm only here because you put me here? Ethan looked at her with tenderness. I only opened the door. You were the one who walked through it. The next day, Clara found a small envelope under her door. A child's drawing, folded with care. It was from Leah. On the paper, 3 figures, Clara, Ethan, and Leah, all holding hands in front of a giant, colorful canvas. Above them, in wobbly kid letters, a phrase, "Thank you for giving our home color." Clara brought a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. It wasn't public praise. It wasn't a technical critique. It was pure. It was truth. The voice of someone who saw her, without filters, without motives, without judgment. She picked up her brushes, opened the paint, and began to paint again. This time, she chose to create a new canvas, one that wasn't part of the exhibit's plan, one that wouldn't follow rules or expectations. She painted for days, guided only by emotion, by the raw feeling that needed to be released. When she finished, it was nearly dawn. The image showed a woman standing at the top of a hill surrounded by wind, rain, and color. Eyes closed, chest open, as if she were about to fly. It was her, whole, unapologetic. The next morning, she delivered the painting to the gallery with a note. This is my answer. When Ethan saw it in the exhibition room days later, he didn't ask anything. He just smiled. Clara had learned that the world would always have something to say. Always. But what truly mattered were the voices echoing inside her, and the ones like Leah's filled with truth and love. because there was a kind of recognition that couldn't be measured by likes or criticism, one that only existed when someone truly saw us. And now, she was ready to be seen, fully. The night of the exhibition arrived like a whisper, heavy with expectation. The gallery hall was filled with faces Clara barely recognized: collectors, critics, art lovers, and the curious. The white walls contrasted with the vibrant colors of her paintings, which seemed to come to life under the carefully placed lighting. The atmosphere was dense, charged with the mix of pride and nervousness that only someone who gives themselves entirely to their work can feel. Clara walked through the space with cautious steps, feeling the weight of the gazes and the murmurs flowing like a current. Every time someone stopped in front of a piece, she held her breath, fearing criticism, judgment, the confirmation of her deepest insecurities. But deep down, there was a spark, a silent hope that her art could speak for itself, that her colors might reach distant hearts. Meanwhile, Leah, in a simple dress and loose hair, ran among the guests, spreading laughter and lightness. She was an unexpected presence in that formal environment, a child who didn't fully understand what was happening, but who felt the energy pulsing in the air. At one point, she approached Clara with a notebook and pencil in hand. Without saying a word, she sat beside the artist and began to draw. Together, they traced lines and shapes, mixing colors and emotions. The audience, at first curious, soon fell silent before that simple and sincere gesture. It wasn't just an art exhibition, it was a communion, a silent conversation between two souls, a child and a woman, connected by paint and love. Ethan watched from a distance, a soft smile on his face and tears in his eyes. Seeing Clara like that, full of life, was like watching a flower bloom after a harsh winter. He felt a mix of pride and admiration, not just for the artist, but for the woman who, despite everything, had chosen to move forward, to break invisible walls, and open herself to the world. As the evening went on, conversations became livelier and the smiles wider. Many approached to compliment her, ask questions, learn more about the stories behind the paintings. Clara, still shy, answered simply, letting her work speak for her. And amidst all that, Leah's presence, with her innocent and spontaneous drawings, brought a touch of magic to the night. At the height of the evening, Leah tugged on Clara's hand and led her to a corner of the room, where a blank mural had been set up for guests to leave their marks. The girl reached into her bag, pulled out a colored crayon, and with the ease of someone who transforms the world with small gestures, began to draw. Clara joined her, eyes shining. Together they painted a simple yet meaningful scene, a house surrounded by trees and flowers, with three figures holding hands, a woman, a man, and a little girl. Above them, a sentence written in childlike handwriting, filled with tenderness, the house that now has color. Silence fell over the room. The guests, moved, realized it wasn't just another piece. It was a symbol of new beginnings, of family, of love built on art and understanding. Texto Padre Ethan approached, pulling Clara into a tight embrace, feeling that in that very moment, everything had finally fallen into place. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was the celebration of a new life, a new story written in brushstrokes of courage, patience, and affection. The night ended with laughter and tears, silent promises and glances that said everything. Clara, Ethan, and Leah knew this was just the first page of a chapter, with many more moments to come, many more to paint. In that gallery hall lit by art and love, everyone understood that true beauty wasn't just in the canvases, but in the story they told. A story of resilience, of unexpected encounters, and of the transformative power of trust. A story that, like life itself, would continue to unfold, colorful and alive, forever. After the exhibition, something shifted in Clara's routine. The studio that had once been a quiet, solitary refuge now became a shared space. Ethan and Leah began frequenting the small apartment in the heart of San Francisco more often than Clara ever expected. What started as a casual cafe encounter turned into a daily life of laughter, conversation, and, above all, small gestures that slowly rebuilt what both had thought was lost forever. Leah, with her childlike curiosity and contagious energy, brought a lightness into that space that Clara hadn't felt in a long time. She painted, drew, scattered crayons across the floor, and sometimes sat on Ethan's lap to hear stories only a father could tell. Clara watched, often with a tight heart, how the girl lit up the room, how her eyes sparkled at each color, each new shape that appeared on the canvas. Ethan, in turn, began to open up in a way few had seen before. He revealed his vulnerabilities, his quiet fears. He didn't speak much, but when he did, each word seemed carefully chosen to build invisible bridges between him, Clara, and Leah. Together, they formed something that even art couldn't fully describe. A family, still in the making, but full of possibility. Among paints, canvases, and scattered papers, the days turned into treasured memories. Clara spent her mornings painting while Leah played nearby, and Ethan made coffee, watching with a soft smile. Sometimes Leah would interrupt the painting to show off a drawing, asking Clara's opinion, and she always found words of encouragement, even for the simplest scribbles. There was a growing sense of belonging. Clara, who had felt invisible and alone for so long, began to realize that this new routine, with its ups and downs, was coloring not just her art, but her heart. Ethan, carrying the weight of past losses, found in that space a place to breathe and slowly rebuild his hope. And Leah, through it all, was the light that guided and connected them. Texto Padrón one day, while a light rain tapped against the studio's foggy windows, Leah came in holding a drawing with special care. It was a simple image, yet deeply meaningful. The three of them, Clara, Ethan, and Leah, holding hands, surrounded by a brightly colored house, flowers, and a blue sky. At the top, a sentence that made Clara swallow hard. The house that now has color. She looked at Ethan, who stood beside her, and felt an emotion words couldn't capture. There, in that child's drawing, was the essence of what they had built. A home. Not just a physical place, but a space where affection, trust, and art came together to create something real. That drawing was placed in a simple frame and hung on the studio wall, becoming a quiet symbol of what was, and what could be. Clara knew that though challenges would still come, she would never again walk this journey alone. With time, their relationship deepened, not only through shared artistic passion, but through the interweaving of lives. Long conversations at the end of the day, small acts of care, and the kind of closeness that only grows with time began to define their new rhythm. Ethan, who once hid behind a mask of success and reserve, discovered that to love and be loved didn't require perfection, just presence. Clara learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, but courage. And Leah, with her innocence and wisdom, taught them both that the most beautiful colors appear when we paint together. And so, in that studio lit by open windows and the light each one carried within, they began writing a new story. A story of connection, rebuilding, and above all, love. And it was there, between brushstrokes and laughter, that Clara understood. True art isn't just what we create with our hands, but what we build with our hearts. On a quiet afternoon, Ethan invited Clara to visit his private studio, a place she had only heard of in stories and seen in pictures. A sacred space where he kept some of the most important pieces from his collection, and where secretly, he nurtured his own unrealized dreams. Clara felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity, as if about to step into sacred ground. When they arrived, he opened the door with a shy smile and led her inside. The studio was spacious, bathed in natural San Francisco light from large windows. White walls were adorned with canvases in various stages of creation. In the center, a large blank canvas stood on an easel, a silent invitation. Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes locked on hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. "This canvas," he began, his voice steady but soft, "is for you, for us." Clara blinked, surprised. For us? He nodded and continued. I want us to paint our future together. Not because I want to control what it will be, but because I want to build it side by side. With patience, no rush, and no pressure to finish. She felt the tears rising, warm and slow, as the world seemed to open up around her. That simple gesture, so full of meaning, was more than a proposal. It was a promise of partnership, of trust, of forever. Ethan extended his hand, offering Clara a paintbrush. She took it, feeling the light weight of the tool, and together they began to trace the first strokes on the blank canvas. Each brushstroke was an unspoken word, a shared dream, a fear overcome. Leah entered the studio with a radiant smile and a small box of colorful paints. Naturally, she approached the two of them, and without hesitation, dipped her fingers into the blue paint, leaving innocent and vibrant marks beside the adult's delicate brushstrokes. Her presence made the moment even more complete, more real. They painted for hours, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging glances and laughter, but always connected by the invisible thread that bound them. The painting didn't need to be perfect. It didn't need to tell a clear story. It only needed to exist, just like them. When night fell, Clara looked at the unfinished work and felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't perfection that mattered, but the journey, the act of creating together, of opening up, of building a life as three. Ethan embraced her, and Leah jumped between them, completing the picture of a family that was forming, not just in words, but in actions. There, in that studio, under the soft glow of the lights and the quiet comfort of togetherness, Clara understood that she had found more than a partner. She had found a home, a place where the colors of hope, love, and new beginnings blended to create the most beautiful work of all. And while the canvas remained unfinished, their story kept being written, brushstroke by brushstroke, day by day, forever. Hey everyone, we've reached the end of this story that painted our hearts with colors of hope, love, and new beginnings. If you felt every brushstroke of this journey, you already know what to do. Drop that like. It's like a big warm hug for Clara, Ethan, and little Leah. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because here we always bring stories that warm the soul. Kind of like a hot cup of coffee on a rainy day in San Francisco, you know? Now tell us, which city are you watching from? I want to know where all these beautiful vibes come from that help this little corner grow more and more. Leave it in the comments. We love chatting with you.